and retaining the retaining the historic value. So one of the missions that we have is to preserve the character of Hyde Park and the beautiful historic and desirable distinguished buildings that we have. And because of that, vacancy was first and foremost in our mind, as well as nuisance properties. And so we went out to the neighborhood and really start engaging our residents to see how and what we could do to facilitate serving or preserving the character. And from that, we developed a committee that specifically focuses on nuisance and vacant properties. And this is what led us here today. So I'm hoping that everyone will take this opportunity to really get engaged and involved, and whatever support that you are able to offer the neighborhood association, our residents definitely would appreciate it. And we're open to suggestions, comments. And with that, I will let Ms. Lily Murphy take it away. Thank you all again. My contact information is in the chat, as well as that for the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. Enjoy.
Thanks, Fatima. What a great introduction. Thanks, Hyde Park neighbors, other concerned stakeholders for being here today. My name is Lily Murphy. I serve as an AmeriCorps Vista for the St. Louis Vacancy Collaborative, which is a coalition of residents, city government employees, and community development practitioners dedicated to reducing vacancy in St. Louis City. We are here today, as Fatima alluded to, we are here today to have a discussion with the Hyde Park neighbors, some of the Vacancy Collaboratives partners, and other stakeholders to talk about how we can work together to turn vacant properties into assets. I will be moderating the discussion today, and we will have some speakers and special guests with us today to help us to shed some light on the topic of vacancy in Hyde Park. So the speakers today are Sean Thomas and Zach Castman of the Proposition Neighborhood Stabilization Team at St. Louis Development Corporation. Can you give us a wave, Sean and Zach? There's Sean and Zach. All right. We have the one and only Ginn the Great, Miss Laura Ginn, vacancy strategist at St. Louis Development Corporation. Give us a wave, Laura Ginn. All right. Thanks, Laura. All right. We have Tasha Barnes of Legal Services of Eastern Missouri's Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative. Give us a wave, Latasha. Welcome, Latasha. And she is joined by Julie Scheipeter, attorney at Stinson LLP. Welcome, Julie. Thank you. All right. And Tara is going to put the speakers' bios in the chat so you can get to know these folks a little bit better. All right. Moving right along here. I'm just going to go over some quick event housekeeping items before we get into the conversation. You are seeing that we are recording this event. The recording will be made available afterwards. I ask that you please try to stay muted if you're not speaking so we can eliminate background noise and interference. Also, if you have a question about a specific property on your block that you are concerned about, please note that we're going to try to keep today's discussion about broad vacancy reduction efforts in the Hyde Park neighborhood. But we do want you to know that we do care about your concerns about specific properties. So if you do have those concerns and you haven't already, please report them to the Citizen Service Bureau. We'll put the number and the link to CSB in the chat. But if you need more help, you can put your contact info in the chat as well. And we will do our best to try to connect you to the correct answer for your question. All right. So most importantly, we want this to be a conversation between you and the speakers. I'll ask questions to kind of start the conversation and get the ball rolling. But I really want you guys to ask questions since this is your neighborhood. So please don't be shy. We, again, really want this to be a conversation between you guys and the speakers. Lastly, I want to thank US Bank for making today possible. They are our event sponsors. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to start with a icebreaker question, which is how many vacant properties, which is buildings plus lots, are in the Hyde Park neighborhood? So guesstimate how many vacant properties are in the neighborhood. Please put your answer in the chat. If you can't use the chat, just yell it out and also tell us your name and we'll write it down. The 2 people that are closest to the correct number will win a door prize. So the folks that already know, like Laura again, please don't put your guesstimate in the chat because we know that you know. And so, yeah, let's give everybody a few minutes to kind of think that over. Tara will keep track and she'll let me know who the winners are. So let's take a minute or so to do a guesstimation.
Do I get to play this time?
We'll see how close you are. All right.
How about you can play, but you can't have the door prize?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
I never get to win.
All right. We're seeing some numbers. Let's take another minute or so to guess. If you can't use it, it's okay. You can shout out your answer and we'll take note of it. All right. Ooh. Okay, guys. All right. Last chance. Go ahead and answer if you haven't already. And we, Tasha, she's on mute. Maybe she's rethinking her answer. But all right. Well, we're going to go ahead and close the time frame to guesstimate the properties. And we're going to go over some maps that will let us know how many properties are, or how many vacant properties are in the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association. And we'll hopefully also provide some context for us for our conversation. So hold on just a minute here. Pull that up. All right. So the correct answer is 920 vacant properties. All right. So that's the correct answer. And so if you look here at this map, this is the key here. These are the vacant buildings. These are the vacant lots, possible vacant buildings, possible vacant lots. So this is the Hyde Park neighborhood. So just buildings. This is a map of just the vacant buildings in the Hyde Park neighborhood. So that total is 309. Just lots, it's 611. So this is the breakdown between LRA owned and privately owned. So LRA owned means that it's publicly owned. It's owned by the city. These are the LRA owned. And privately owned means that it's not owned by the city. So here's your privately owned buildings. All right. I'm going to pull it back up so I can see you guys. And hopefully that will provide some context to help us kind of start and be thinking about what we want to do in Hyde Park and how we want to be thinking about how to tackle this issue. So I will start by asking Laura Ginn, vacancy strategist at St. Louis Development Corporation. So we just looked at the properties that are owned by LRA and then the properties that are privately owned. So let's start by talking about LRA. What responsibilities does LRA have or not have in regards to addressing vacant properties?
Yeah, so most people are familiar with LRA, the Land Reutilization Authority, commonly talked about as one of the top slumlords in the city, along with Northside. So that is where I and Sean and Zach are employed. So the LRA is actually the city, or not the city, the nation's oldest land bank that's run at least in part by a city, where 2021 is our 50-year anniversary as a land bank. And as a land bank, we're the owner of last resort, which means we came into existence to fill a gap of when there's no other owner available anymore for a property. Who will it fall to? And so properties mostly come into the LRA inventory because they were privately owned and foreclosed on, went to a sheriff's tax sale, and no one bid on them. And when that happens, they come into our inventory. So right now, if we just look at the Hyde Park neighborhood, and based on those numbers we were just looking at, we are responsible for 35% of the vacant buildings in the Hyde Park neighborhood. So obviously, so that's what 1 out of every 3 that you see does fall on our office's responsibility to not maintain those properties to code, as you know, but at least try to maintain safety and reduce any health and safety risks around that property. It is our responsibility to keep it boarded and to keep it mowed and maintained. Now, LRA does have a small maintenance crew. We have about 8 people, but that's for our full inventory of about 12,000 properties. And so forestry department does mow and provide extra services for our LRA owned properties. And they are currently at a rotation of about 5 times a year for mowing our vacant lots and about 3 times a year for mowing around our vacant buildings. You'll also notice that behind vacant buildings can be extremely difficult to access. And so a lot of times with buildings, you might just see the front yard mowed and the back is this like forest to be contended with. So 35% of the buildings in the neighborhood, and on that note of only mowing 5 times, we do own more than 70% of the vacant lots in the Hyde Park neighborhood. So that means out of, trying to look at kind of the total of, if there's 920 vacant properties in the whole neighborhood, we LRA own about 550. So that is over half in the neighborhood overall that we are responsible for and aren't great at, but always trying to do better. Does that answer? Sets the stage at least.
All right, Sean is nodding. Does anybody have any questions for Laura in terms of LRA's responsibilities? No. Well, I guess I'm wondering, since this is about the Hyde Park neighborhood and how the neighborhood association can turn vacant properties into assets, how can the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association be involved in conversations about maintaining LRA properties or about people putting bids on LRA properties? What can the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association do to kind of be a part of that conversation?
Sorry, I didn't realize you were coming back to me again. So being more involved in kind of the LRA process, right, is pretty much the question. How does the neighborhood become more infused in that process? So, LRA properties are available to purchase. It is a bid process. That's a state statute that people put in bids on the properties, and that once a month the board reviews those proposals and makes determination on who can purchase the properties. And what the bid process is looking for is not just the price of what you want to pay for that property, because that's not always our ultimate goal. We never make a profit, so that's not a selling factor always necessarily. And so it's the other factor of how likely then is that person bidding to take that property and get it back into active reuse, get that occupancy permit, get it used again. If you're talking about buildings, have they shown some success with turning, vacant and derelict properties into functioning? Latasha got kicked out. Oh, there she is. And so we are looking at, is it an existing resident that wants to be a homeowner that's been living in the neighborhood and as a renter, and they have kind of family or means to be able to bring this property into a homeowner situation, and that's going to definitely kick someone up higher in our consideration than like a rando speculator from California. And when you think about then how can the neighborhood be more involved in that, each neighborhood has kind of taken a slightly different approach. Some have a development committee under like the neighborhood association that can feed into that process. There's the 27th ward has been trying to do this with their housing committee, which is under the ward and the aldermanic kind of organizing of residents, as opposed to a neighborhood association or CDC. But my point is, no matter who you as a community decides has that kind of collective voice and being a part of that LRA property decision making, we're happy to figure out how to feed that into the process. And so what that can look like is maybe once a month, all of the offers that we receive on LRA properties get shared with the neighborhood association or the committee. And they're always shared with your alderperson, but by the way. And having that committee have a chance to review those applications and feedback, your thoughts on those proposals that are coming in that can be put forward to the LRA board for consideration when we're making those decisions. And that's something that we would just want to work with each group individually and figure out that system, but happy to, infuse that in as neighborhoods have the capacity to play that role.
Yeah, thanks for that. So it sounds like that the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association can definitely be a part of that conversation. We have a question in the chat. How can neighbors view LRA properties?
So if you see a padlock on the door, you can actually come to the LRA office and check out a key, and it is a universal key, and sign a waiver that you're not going to sue us if you fall through a floorboard. And we'll give you a key and let you roam around in properties and see what there is. If there's not a padlock and it's completely boarded up, we can arrange for the maintenance crew to meet you out there and take those boards off and show you through and then board it back up after. So always happy to coordinate that with people.
Awesome. And then
Thanks.
The LRA inventory it's also on the city's website as well. So you can view it digitally too.
You can. I'll tell you, if you're searching for a property and you can't find it, and this comes up, it's because it's either pending an offer that we've received, or we've accepted an offer but we haven't closed yet. So you might think like, well, I know this is LRA, how come I don't see it? And then it might be in one of those situations, and you can still reach out and see, if it's an option.
Cool.
Ooh, good question. I mean, it should, yeah. Let me find the website. I'll put it in the chat. And since there's questions coming in about LRA specifically, Lily, I can field them in the chat if you want to move on to.
No, we can spend another minute or so on this.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
So how can you view LRA properties? Be added to the list to get the list of, so Fatima, that's something that I think we would want a separate meeting and talk about who would be reviewing and just how we would get that communication working back and forth. Because like I said, it's different with everyone. The one that I use as a reminder, and it's not a perfect example, but the alderwoman in the 27th, Alderwoman Pam Boyd, her executive assistant schedules that meeting every month. Keeps residents on track, makes sure she gets those addresses from LRA and compiles that information, gives it back to us. And that's a really important role that we would need, as someone who can be dedicated to being that kind of outside partner to LRA to keep the communication going. The LRA board, I'll put the link in the chat here in a second. And how many properties are sold on average every month. If you guys, if you want to see, can I put an image in the chat?
I don't believe so.
If you want to come back, I have that. I have both of those, but you can come back to me.
And Laura as well, if you want to send an image to participants, you can send it to me and I can, or send it to Fatima and both of us can make sure that folks see it. So yeah. So Laura, we don't want to go away from you too quick unless you're looking up something. And in that case, we don't want to cut you off, but
No, go ahead.
but yeah, so just another aspect of vacancy that is talked about a lot is demolition. And so, in kind of the same way, how can the neighborhood association be involved or be alerted about potential demolitions going on in the neighborhood?
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay. So we have currently just two things that are institutionalized into our system of communication for publicly funded demolitions. One is anytime we award a demolition contract, at the end of every week, our building division's board up crew gets a list of all of those properties, and they go out and put those orange stickers on the buildings that say demolition coming soon. And if you want more information, call this number. That number goes directly to me. And then number two is at STLVC.com, our interactive map of demolitions in the city, our demo tracker. Now, stickers on a building and an interactive map are only two points of communication. So obviously we're, I think, missing a lot. Some cities have, door hangers that go out to every property within a block or two, or even text notifications for people that have signed up that can, send you a list. These are things that we hope are going to be coming more online over this next year, because the last year of COVID really kind of set us back. We were making some really great improvements on how we deal with demolitions in the city. So that said, we do have some things coming up that should make that easier. And unfortunately, in the meantime, it's kind of similar to that housing committee conversation, right? Like if we know who wants more detailed information and where to send it and what format works best for you to communicate across your community, we are happy to provide that. If the demo tracker and others are kind of insufficient. But I would also, we keep that updated about every 2 weeks, and under the map, you can download the Excel file. So if you regularly download that and filter it to your neighborhood or your ward, you can have a really regular list of understanding what's coming up, and then reach out if you have questions or, if something doesn't seem right. And especially in Hyde Park, know that every demolition in your neighborhood goes through cultural resources, and we try to go through both the neighborhood association and the Alder. And so there are several points. And the ones that slip through the cracks tend to be kind of emergency cases, where building's really falling and maybe we get at it without having as much of a conversation. So I think, again, what you're hearing is like, we try, but it's a little fluffy and it's not systematized. And again, we can all work together, I think, to make that more systematic.
Sounds good. And my dogs are barking in the background, so hopefully they'll stop soon. But we have a question in the chat. Is there a local association of neighborhood associations? If so, how has it been relating and engaging with LRA board?
That sounds like a question.
I can answer that.
Association of neighborhood. Yeah, go ahead.
The local association here in Hyde Park is the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, and that information on how to contact us, Adrienne, is in the chat, but I can make sure I put it in there. And we have been working with LRA along with Latasha Barnes and Brittany, as well as Julie, to be as up to date as we can on all of the goings on with LRA and the demos and all of that. But we do and are pulling together a community development committee. And so we will definitely be getting a better handle on that. So I hope that answers your question specifically about Hyde Park. As to the other neighborhood associations, I'm not sure how they would operate.
Tasha, go ahead.
Mr. Stillman, SLACO, the St. Louis Association of Community Organizations, is kind of like an umbrella group that a lot of the individual neighborhood associations like Hyde Park and West End Neighbors and Academy Sherman Park, they all tend to kind of join and connect with. So there's another organization as well that's also engaged in pulling together neighborhood associations and providing that additional support.
Fantastic. So I think we can move along. Tasha's already kind of unmuted herself and is kind of getting into the conversation. So I think I'm going to officially pass it on to Tasha. If you guys do still have questions for Laura again and anything about LRA, please put it in the chat and we'll connect you with Laura or whoever we need to get your questions answered. But I think I am going to transition to LaTasha Barnes and Julie. And so my first question is, what is the Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative? What is the Abandoned Housing Act? And how are these two things helping Hyde Park address vacancies?
Well, I'll start if that's okay with you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Ms. Mohammed and the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Vacancy Collaborative for hosting today's session and for each of you for attending. My name is LaTasha Barnes. I'm an attorney with the Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative. We are a program offered through Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, your local legal aid provider. The Neighborhood Vacancy Initiative was formed to help improve the quality of life in St. Louis neighborhoods by providing free legal services to place-based organizations. So your neighborhood association, specifically the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association, to prevent property abandonment and to support the redevelopment of vacant property using legal tools. And so our program specifically received support from the Legal Services Corporation that allowed us to partner with pro bono attorneys from law firms in the community like Stinson and Julie Scheipeter, so that we can work together to help community groups tackle vacancy challenges. So your legal team for the Hyde Park neighborhood is staffed by both legal aid attorneys, myself and my colleague Brittany Hubbard, and then our pro bono private attorneys, Julie Scheipeter and her team at Stinson. And we provide representation to the community groups in court proceedings and in real estate negotiations. And through this collaboration, we're really able to help expand the neighborhood's capacity to make impact in their community. So while Hyde Park Neighborhood Association is working with the LRA board and communicating with Director Costello and working with Laura again around LRA properties and vacant parcels and demolition in their communities, really looking at those publicly owned properties, the legal team can come in and support advocacy as it pertains to privately owned properties so that we can support neighborhood-driven development that is equitable and respectful of community wishes. So along that line, we work really closely with your neighborhood group, attending meetings, hosting special listening sessions, participating in opportunities like this and other community engagement events so that we can really work with you and become a part of the community so that we can work better together. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Julie and she can talk more about our legal tools and what some of our processes are.
Thanks, Tasha, and thanks everyone for coming today. I'm Julie Scheipeter. I'm an attorney at Stinson, like Tasha mentioned, and Stinson, along with Legal Services, serves as counsel to the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association with respect to these vacancy matters. So there's three main tools that we use in court whenever the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association identifies properties that are kind of good targets to use these tools. And I'm thankful to Tasha and her team at Legal Services, as long as Fatima, because they really do the hard work in identifying kind of the best houses, abandoned properties to really use these tools. And then I feel like I have the easy job of just, moving it through the court process. But I will explain that because I'm sure there's a little bit of mystery around it. So the Abandoned Housing Act is a tool that allows a neighborhood organization like the HPNA to go to court and ask the court to grant it temporary possession and then eventually actually title and ownership of a vacant property that meets certain qualifications. So, Hyde Park is definitely a neighborhood organization that qualifies under the statute. And how the process typically works is, although it's not required, normally what we do first is send out a letter to the property owner saying, your property is a nuisance. Here's all of the city code violations that are present on the property. This is how long we've been sort of watching you and noticing how bad the conditions are. If you don't clean it up within X period of time, we're going to file this lawsuit. And I think it's normally Tasha's practice as well to send a copy of our draft petition that we're intending to file. And so we give the property owner a little bit of time to respond to that. A lot of times the properties that we're targeting, we know are not going to have a responsive owner, and that's okay. So we just give it a little bit of time, and then we go ahead and we file our lawsuit. In my experience so far, at least with my 2 Hyde Park neighborhood cases, the owner doesn't respond at all. And so sometimes they dodge service. Other times we end up having to serve them through the Secretary of State, which basically just sort of gives public notice because the owner can't even be found. And then at that point, we ask the court to enter a default judgment, a temporary default judgment against the owner, and grant the neighborhood association temporary possession. And so then what that allows HPNA to do is to then work with a rehab partner who will draw up a rehab plan of how to get the property back into a non-nuisance condition. And so the court order, even though the neighborhood association is not yet the property owner, the court order allows the neighborhood organization to actually go into the property, make all those repairs with their rehab partner. And then at the end of that, we go and we show the court that the property has been properly rehabbed. And at that point, we ask the court to then actually give the neighborhood association title. And, I know that legal services and HPNA have certain preferred rehabbers that they've worked with. It's my understanding that, a private citizen can do this as well if they have the funds and they're interested in doing this kind of work. So keep that in mind. And how I guess like the cost and benefits work is the neighborhood organization is the entity that actually has standing to go into court and use this statute to get this relief. But the rehab partner is who is putting up all the money to do the rehabilitation. So before we begin that process, we usually sign a memorandum of understanding between the neighborhood and the rehab partner that at the end of it, after the rehab partner does all of the rehabilitation, the court order will actually give the neighborhood organization title, but the understanding is that at that point, the neighborhood organization will then transfer title to the rehab partner. And the ultimate goal is that, it ends up in the hands of a community resident who can then continue to maintain the property in good condition. I don't know, Lily and Tasha, do you want me to talk about the 2 other tools? I'm not as familiar with receivership, and I think the AHA is really our best tool, but I can briefly go over the other 2.
Yeah, I can leave that up to Tasha. Tasha, she'd like to describe it?
Sure. I wonder if there are any questions before we talk about the other tools.
And I can talk about them too. I just didn't know if people were interested.
Go ahead, Julie.
Okay, so there's 2 other statutes that are available that we can use. One is just our statutory nuisance, or the nuisance statute. And that one is just used where the property owner or the property has a bunch of nuisance conditions. It's kind of the same thing as where the Abandoned Housing Act is used. The difference is that in order to bring an AHA claim, the property owner has to have not paid taxes for at least 2 years. And so when that is not the case, when for whatever reason they're keeping up on their taxes, but otherwise completely abandoning the property, that tool is not available to us. And so then we have to kind of look at these other 2. So there's nuisance and receivership. And with nuisance, we're just asking the court to basically order the property owner to bring the condition back or bring the property back into a non-nuisance condition. So fix it up. And you spell out specifically what the code violations are and what you want the court to order the property owner to do. I've had one, not for Hyde Park, but another neighborhood where It ultimately ended up being successful, but it was a very long road because the property owner just wasn't responding. And without that hook of potentially losing title to the property, they just kind of didn't care. And when the plaintiff in those cases is a neighborhood organization as opposed to a private property owner, there's also not any monetary damages that are available for relief. And so we find that whenever a neighborhood organization is bringing that type of lawsuit, it's not quite as effective. But usually when we bring an AHA case, we'll also put in that as an additional count just in case the property owner comes in the middle of the lawsuit and pays their taxes, then that tool is no longer available to us. But at that point, we can then ask the court, okay, at least make them fix up the property. Now we know who they are. They're here in court, you know, order them to make the property right. And then finally, receivership. I've never personally used this one, but it seems a little bit similar to the Abandoned Housing Act in that the neighborhood organization gets temporary possession of the property and they will actually make the repairs and then ask the court to have the property owner reimburse them for that work. Or after 2 years, if the property owner doesn't come forward, then eventually the neighborhood organization can get title. And please correct me if I'm wrong on that, Tasha, because I've never used it, but.
No, you're correct.
Okay. So those are the 3 legal tools that we have. And I don't know, Brittany or Tasha can tell us how many cases we've done since the NVI has begun. I'm not sure. There's multiple attorneys in my firm that are handling these. And then of course, legal services does a bunch of them as well. But, you know, I understand that litigation is kind of your last resort for most people, but we have found it to be effective and it can make a real transformation in the neighborhood and get nuisance properties cleaned up. I know that Tasha and Peter, who she works with at Legal Services, a lot of times just sending out the notice, if it's a property owner that's, you know, actually available and alive, that can be enough to kind of scare them into compliance. And so just having Legal Services and Stinson sort of on the neighborhood organizations team, I think can be really effective. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I'm briefly going to share my screen. Just Julie mentioned the work that we're doing in Hyde Park. And so this was a synopsis of some of our outcomes, project outcomes at the end of the year last year. So since the project has started, we've handled 12 problem property cases specifically on behalf of Hyde Park, impacting 25 housing units in your neighborhood. And we've seen permit values pulled exceeding $32,000 so far. COVID really put kind of a barrier hindrance in some of our rehab efforts. And so we're now starting to see rehabilitation process pick up again for a lot of our properties. So we anticipate that this year will be an even higher value year for you all. We've done 2 transactional cases on behalf of the neighborhood. We have handled 5 vacancy prevention cases. So that is us doing beneficiary deeds or property tax circuit breakers for individual residents, helping residents in the neighborhood clear title so that they can qualify for home repair funds or borrow against their home to do additional repairs or even just transfer clear title to their homes. 9 of these cases have been placed with pro bono attorneys. 11 have been placed with pro bono attorneys. 9 have been closed so far. And through our pro bono partners at Stinson, we've seen over 200 hours of pro bono legal services just from their firm alone. So this doesn't count the amount of time that the legal aid team has invested in the cases, but 200 hours of pro bono service is a tremendous value to the neighborhood. Private legal services are extremely expensive. So it's been a really great value to you all to just have Stinson on board and really being able to expand our capacity. So there was a question in the chat that asked, how can neighbors help us with these cases? And I will say there is a lot of room in our advocacy for residents to be involved. In fact, we prefer that residents actually lead this work. And so to the extent that residents are able to help us document and research vacant properties, we appreciate that, because you are on the ground, you know your communities better than we do. You know what's happening at these properties, you know when the owners are absent, when they're trying their best. You can help us identify what are the actual strongest cases to bring, who are the property owners we should be more aggressive with, and which ones should we be more lenient with. Residents work really closely with your local building inspectors and your neighborhood improvement specialists to document concerns and to advocate for improvements in your communities. And we use those records to build and establish our cases for court. Oftentimes we encourage the neighborhood association to make that initial contact with the property owners through sending out letters and trying to call the property owner to explore options to resolve concerns that you may have, or making referrals to contractors or service providers when they may need that. And so ultimately, the neighborhood association, the residents in Hyde Park are really driving the work that we do. And so you guys play the most important role, right? You tell us what's important to you, and you give us what we need in order to be successful and to advocate on your behalf. In addition to that, we really look for resident input when selecting or identifying developers. And oftentimes we get referrals for residents in the community who want to be developers, who want to really reinvest in their community and be the ones to perform the repairs on these properties when needed. And we need more of that, to be honest. And then we really look to the neighborhood and to the residents to tell us what types of community benefits agreements they want in their development agreements with the developers who will do these properties. So for example, residents may want a developer working on a vacant house on their block to add additional street light or to install security cameras, or they may be particularly concerned that this developer hires someone local to do the work, or to address other safety and beautification concerns. And so residents play a really important role in everything that we do. And that is why we host a lot of listening sessions for Hyde Park. And we're often inviting you all in the community to come out and to tell us your concerns and to let us know what's important to you, because that's what we want to prioritize. Our role is to really supplement, right, and to work alongside you as the residents. And so we can't do that without your voice and your input. And so you guys play the most important role in everything that we're doing.
I love it. That's fantastic. Sounds like there's a lot of ways that the community can get involved. We have a question in the chat. How can the community get involved with their concerns around a commercial nuisance property?
Yeah, I'll jump in here because there are quite a few of vacant commercial properties in Hyde Park. I don't have the exact number. I do believe the VEXI Collaborative may have that figure. But I think advocating at the local level, right, reporting concerns when you notice them at vacant commercial properties, letting your neighborhood improvement specialists know, reporting it to the Citizen Service Bureau so that those concerns are documented and we're getting inspectors out there to note and cite those code violations when they exist. Going to your alderperson, working with your alderperson to really raise these issues and to pull them into the advocacy work, right? And to make sure that they are well aware of what your concerns are so that they can be more diligent and aggressive in their approach to addressing these issues on your behalf. There are local regulatory agencies and state regulatory agencies that you can complain to. And I know Sarah Rubenstein with Great Rivers Environmental Law Center is on the call, and she knows those processes much better than I do. I know that they exist, and so there's a mechanism for kind of building those complaints. I will also say really generating that people power. A friend of mine uses that term often, but what I mean by that is really getting together.
Oh no, Tasha's freezing. We'll give it a second.
Or both Tasha's froze?
Oh yeah, because there's two Tashas and both are frozen.
Well,
I
Can
just
you guys
tapped
hear
it
me
going
now?
out. Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, are you guys able to hear me now?
yes.
Okay, perfect. I don't know when I cut out. My internet is a little unstable. But I was just basically saying, creating that collective voice through working with your neighborhood association is really powerful. Getting together with the residents, with the neighborhood association to do some collective problem solving, identifying stakeholders in the community who share your concerns and who have the energy and the momentum to help you advance those. And so there's no one solution to every problem. But I do think that together, when you guys are together, that you guys can put your minds together and really identify the best solution for specific problems in your community.
Awesome. Thank you, Tasha. I do want to transition us to the Prop NS team. So like I said, if you guys have any more questions for Tasha or Julie, please put them in the chat. But we are going to transition to talking about Prop NS. So Sean and Zach, what is Prop NS and how can neighbors get involved with Prop NS?
Right. Thank you for asking, and thank you for inviting us today. And I do want to mention before I get too deep into this that the Hyde Park neighborhood really has a special place in my heart. And I'm not just pandering to the crowd. I do really have an appreciation for the wonderful historic architecture you have there and the large number of passionate, concerned, and actively involved residents. So those are key ingredients for strong community, and I love that about you. So I want to mention Prop NS is a result of a city ordinance. It was passed by the voters. And so that means, and I share this for a couple important reasons. One is that we are obligated by law to follow what the ordinance tells us we can and can't do. But the other part is that this actually starts from the community. This is something that the residents of the city, various community groups throughout the city said many years ago that they were just sick and tired of nothing happening with a lot of the vacant buildings, or the buildings just getting completely torn down and nothing being invested into stabilizing buildings that can be saved. So the residents of the city put this on the ballot, passed it in April of 2017. That was many years ago. And they called it Prop NS specifically because N and S stand for neighborhood stabilization. However, I want to make a key distinction here is that it's called the Prop NS program, not the Proposition Neighborhood Stabilization Program or the Neighborhood Stabilization Program in general. Because if you go to the city's website and you Google neighborhood stabilization or neighborhood stabilization program, you're going to find 9 other things before you get to the Prop NS program. There actually is a neighborhood stabilization team that predated this program that's around, and you know about your neighborhood improvement specialist probably. So we try to make sure that people understand it's not part of the neighborhood stabilization team. It's not neighborhood improvement specialists. It's different. And then there was a federal program back during the foreclosure crisis that was called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, NSP, which was designed to intervene to help people in foreclosure or to deal with the large number of properties. Anyway, I mention all that because it's key to distinguish why we say NS specifically instead of the whole neighborhood stabilization. All right, having said that, as I mentioned, the program itself grew out of what residents asked for. And what the residents asked for and put on the ballot was that the city would have a designated pot of funds that would specifically be focused on stabilizing LRA-owned buildings or city-owned buildings in general. But LRA is the repository of vacant residential buildings in particular. And this program has a few components that are very restricted to this program. One is that the buildings that qualify for our stabilization have to be owned by LRA. They have to be residential in use with no more than 6 units, and they have to be available for purchase. So that means we can't deal with all of the vacant buildings in Hyde Park or elsewhere in the city. We can't deal with all of the LRA buildings that are in Hyde Park or rest of the city. And by my last count, I checked the available properties list that LRA produces every month and updates and puts on the website. So if you ever want to find out what's available, there are 74 buildings that qualify as residential or mixed use with residential components in Hyde Park right now. I don't know how many of those are 6 units or fewer, but that means our focus for this program can only start with those 74. And then we also have the program set up to deal with nominations from the public. And I love the fact that Latasha ended her presentation about how it really relies on the community, and the key component is the community as a partner. That's the way this program was set up too. We are focusing our efforts on the buildings that the community nominates, and they submit online. And I'm gonna pass the torch to Zach in a moment here, where he can talk about the nomination process and what we go through to evaluate these buildings. But we do want the community to tell us which buildings you all want us to focus our efforts on. There isn't enough money to do every single one of the buildings that would be qualified as eligible. So we have to start with the ones that are priorities for the community. So far we have been accepting nominations from the community since September, but since the program was created before we even had the resources to do anything, our staff spent a considerable amount of time looking at buildings that might be good test cases that we could start a pilot phase. So we identified a few buildings that up to, I think we ended up with 13 or so in the end, but 13 pilot buildings, and started work as soon as the money was available. We weren't sure how soon we would announce the program and then start accepting nominations, but before we could even start receiving nominations and processing and reviewing those, we had a chance to really hit the ground running with these pilot buildings. And a couple of those are in the Hyde Park area. But beyond that, of the buildings that we've started with, between the nominated properties so far, as well as the pilots, we have, I think I had a total list here somewhere. There are 3 that have been in the pilot phase, completed and actually posted for sale, because that's another component of the program, is that we stabilize them with contractors, private contractors, that we put these out to bid for them to do the work. And we can only do up to $30,000 for a single family home or house, or up to $50,000 for anything that has more units than one, so up to 6 units. And so far we had those roughly 13 or so in the pilot phase, plus 5 that have been approved by us through the committee process that were presented to the LRA board. And I'll just briefly mention the committee process that Zach will review the whole evaluation we go through. But the way it works is that we receive the nominations, we look at them to see if they're eligible, we do the full evaluation about whether it's a good fit, and then we present to a committee. And the committee is made up of 7 individuals, 3 of whom are appointed by the mayor, 4 appointed by aldermen from the wards with the highest number of vacant buildings. One of those wards is the 3rd ward. So we have a member on our committee, Leonetta Nelson, who is appointed by the alderman there. So we present these to the committee, and then the committee gives us feedback on that. And then we present that feedback to the LRA board, who officially approves us putting them out to bid and hiring contractors to stabilize them. And then we put them up for sale. A long process, and there are a lot more details that I could go into if you would like, but I'll let Zach take over from here, since you've heard enough from me already. And Zach can talk about whatever I left out, but also specifically about the nomination process, and then what we go through for the evaluation. Zach?
All right, thanks, Sean. Good morning still. Thank you all for inviting us here. Yeah, I think Sean did a good job covering the basics of the program. One thing that's really important to note is that this is stabilization work. It's not full rehab. And so that work is mainly trying to keep the building watertight. So a lot of that work is going to consist of roofing repair and or replacement, tuck pointing, shoring up windows. The buildings will be boarded up afterwards. So the idea is to kind of clear the building or remove any debris that's going to allow the building to continue to deteriorate over time, with the goal then being, once we sell them, the person who then owns it has 18 months, which is basic LRA procedure, 18 months to get it up to occupancy code. If they need an extension, they're more than welcome to ask for that. And the vast majority of the time, if there's any work that's been done, like a permit's been pulled and the person is showing that they're moving towards getting towards occupancy, that extension's almost always granted. Other than that, yeah, I'll move on to the public nomination process. So I know Lily dropped the public or the website into the chat a little bit ago. That website, it's got a much more thorough description of the program than Sean just presented. There's some good information on there. Thanks for dropping in again, Lily. There are some blue bars on the left of the screen. I think it's the third one down as to how to nominate a building for stabilization funding. If you click on that, it'll go in much more detail than I will now, but I encourage you, if you would like to nominate a building, to read through there. People who can nominate buildings would be anybody who's a resident in the city or anybody who owns property in the city can nominate a building for stabilization. I know Tara also dropped in the current available building list. So you can either access that or you can do a specific address search within LRA, and we've got links to that on the website on that same webpage. But really, any building that's currently available can be nominated and will go through our process as Sean described. If something's not eligible, so it's not currently available because there's an offer on it, it's being held for a specific reason, it might have a CDA option on it, that makes things a little more complicated for us. And unfortunately, we can't move forward with those nominations because there's more strings attached. And it makes it difficult for us because we do have that limited budget, like Sean mentioned. And so when you nominate a building, we ask some basic information, we'll ask your name and email address, like contact information in case we need to get back to you. That information's held internally and it's not publicly shared. So it's more for us if we have questions about the nomination, we can follow up with the nominator. But there's a section where they'll ask several questions, like what's your relationship to the building, just because we want to know, is it somebody who lives on the block who's nominating it? Is it somebody from a neighborhood organization, somebody who works for the city, somebody who's just a city resident, things like that. And so we really encourage that people check those boxes that apply to them, because if you leave those blank, then we might have to follow up with you, just because we want to make sure that they are actually city residents or people who own property in the city who are nominating these. Because again, like Sean said, the community is the people that we're here to kind of serve. And we want to see that, you are all experts in your area, in your neighborhood, in your community, and we want to respect that. And you know much more than we do about your surroundings. So we would like to defer to you on that. So there's some basic information on there. It's pretty quick to fill out. You could probably fill it out in about 5 minutes. That then is thrown to us. We get a notification where we review to make sure it is eligible, that it is available in LRA, and that there's no holds on it or anything. We then make plans to go, it's usually Sean, myself, and Banjo, who was a building inspector. He's now a stabilization specialist with us. And so he has expertise in structural conditions of buildings. We go and we review the buildings to make sure they're in sound enough shape that the budgets that we have can do enough to actually stabilize the building. We wouldn't want to spend taxpayer money. We wouldn't want to put $30,000 into a building and it still has a wall missing, because that's not, we don't think that's appropriate use for taxpayer money. So we're going to review it and make sure that it can be stabilized within our budget. We also have a building rating form that Laura Ginn did a lot of work on a couple of years ago now, I think, but working a lot with the Vacancy Collaborative to do an iterative process with community members to make sure that we are looking for conditions that community members think are valuable. So some of that includes checking what other buildings are vacant on the block, which of them are owned by LRA, which are private, try to figure out occupancy if there's any buildings on the block that have outstanding code violations, because we don't only look at the building for review, we also look at the block conditions, we look at the neighborhood as a whole. So it's kind of this multi-layer approach to try to figure out not only what community would like to see done, but also where it makes sense to spend this money. We also don't want to, we don't want to be spending public dollars to support the private market and stuff that the private market could easily rehab on their own. So it's this kind of balancing act, and it's heavily community informed, but we follow this rating form. Once that's done, there's a score based on a lot of criteria from historical significance, building condition, neighborhood amenities, multiple things like that. It's laid out very clearly on the website. And then once that's done, it's given a score. Then we go into reviewing with the Stabilization Advisory Committee, like Sean discussed. They give a recommendation, and that's passed on to the LRA board. If buildings are approved, we then, Banjo writes up a scope of work that's released. We put out calls to bid from contractors who will then submit bids. Our team determines which are best fit for that specific property, and then the stabilization work actually begins. And we've got 3 properties that have currently been completely through that, to where now they've been put up through the sales process. Our sales process, we have a bid window that's open for 21 days. Anybody's welcome to put a bid on a property. It's the same, it's very similar layout to how you would bid on any LRA property, excuse me. So there's a $25 non-refundable fee, unfortunately, that we have to do because our staff does do background work just to make sure that the nominator has the means to get the building up to occupancy once it's done, so that these funds are appropriately spent. And yeah, I've gone on long enough, so we can go to the questions. Do you have anything, Sean?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of points you mentioned that are actually related to the questions. So you mentioned the public nomination process and how that works. And there's at least, I think, a question from Tasha here about if we're looking for certain types of nominators or encouraging certain people. We have to accept nominations from anybody who's eligible, as Zach indicated, residents of the city, people who own property in the city, and neighborhood associations or community-based organizations. So we don't give preference to say you as a resident of Hyde Park have greater value over somebody who lives just across the line in Old North or in St. Louis Place. But we will take a look at that and keep that in mind. And when we share that with our committee, sometimes they may consider that an important factor. But we accept them from anybody. What we would like to share is that some neighborhoods have taken an approach, and we've talked to at least one other community group, where they said they have a committee in their neighborhood that's going to be doing more of an inventory of these LRA buildings, and collectively they're looking at and determining which ones they'd like to nominate. Some places they want to go through and nominate absolutely everything, which you're free to do, but we would prefer that you do some prioritizing, really. The other point with the nominations is that you can submit, I don't know, did you mention this, Zach? You can submit an endorsement letter or letters of support. The nomination process, the way it works online, is that at the time you nominate, you have to be able to upload it. You can't go back in, log in, and then add it. However, we certainly will accept as staff if you send something to us by email afterwards to let us know that the neighborhood association met and this property was nominated. We would like you to know this has our support. That nomination or that support letter could come from the neighborhood association, could come from the alderman, a variety of other stakeholders, or a resident who lives next door. Somebody could say, I'm submitting this and I live next door and here's my letter, or I see that this property was submitted and here's a letter from me. So anyway, we do take that into consideration. We do want to consider the broader community context there. And the other question related to that is multiple nominations. And this is an important piece because we'll save you a lot of time if you think this is going to help. It does not help to have multiple nominations. So for the same property, we had this happen in the very early days when the program was announced. We had a couple properties that had dozens, well, maybe not dozens, but close to that, of nominations for the very same property. And the really unfortunate fact is that the 2 that received an awful lot of nominations weren't even eligible for the program. So somebody went through the effort of trying to recruit others to help back up their nomination. And it turns out it was a building, one case, well, both cases, they were privately owned by parties that we can't control. So that doesn't help. So make sure it's actually eligible, but also if it's already on our list, we are going to go through our process of reviewing it regardless of how many times that property shows up. And it just adds more trouble for you, really, if you're trying to nominate something that's already on the list. I think there may be other questions that I missed, but there was something about public-private partnership with Prop NS and Opportunity Zone funds. I don't know the best answer to that question, except for the fact that buildings we stabilize, as we indicated, will only be stabilized, so they won't be fully developed. Some cases, we are looking at properties that are beyond our budget, and we have to say to the committee, or we present the facts to the committee, and they say, we don't think this is a good use of the funds because $30,000 isn't going to do a good enough job. Theoretically, the city could have another pot of funds that would allow buildings that really are on the edge or aren't going to be done being stabilized with our funds, and maybe the city could apply some additional funds in those cases if it's an important enough property. But the other more important part is that once we're finished stabilizing, as Zach indicated, they're put up for sale and they're posted there, and an entity, whether it's the neighborhood association or combination of the neighborhood association with key partners, could bid on the purchase and then actually pay the full development costs. So perhaps there's an entity that you can help create that could actually see it through to completion once it's finished on our side. I don't know if there's another interpretation there of that question, Zach, you'd like to offer?
No, I think you covered that good. There was another question or two that I was going to jump in and answer since I know you're explaining, so it's hard to read. There's one good question. Once a property is stabilized and bidding is open, does that bidding price start at the price after stabilization, or is it the initial LRA price? The answer is it's the initial LRA price. So the program is not intended to make money. We're not trying to pass that stabilization cost on to whoever ends up buying it. So if it was $1,000 to start, we put it on hold. Once it's nominated, we put, up to $30,000 in, the bidding will then open at $1,000. So there's no control over what it ends at, which property. It's a silent bid process too. So you could submit a bid for $1,000, but somebody could go for $1,500. And if they have equal means to complete the project, we would pick that one. And you, as that initial offer, would not know that somebody outbidded you. So that's a little something to remember with that process.
But I'll jump into the questions about the actual ones that have been sold. We have 3, as we mentioned, that have been posted for sale and that we received bids on. They are technically not sold yet. They are on the LRA board agenda for this coming Wednesday. There were buyers, offerers who were selected, and will be public information then who those individuals are. So it's not official yet, but as of Wednesday, there will be the first 3 done. And then that's all posted on our website. Number one, when they are available, as Zach indicated, we have spec sheets that provide some detail about the property, what has been done, how much was invested in it, who the contractor was who did the work. And that's available for anybody who wants to find our website. And you had the link to that there. And that's where they're posted when they're for sale. And then anything that's going to be completed and finished, we will also post the status and updates about them on our website as well. I think there was another question I saw. Zach, you might have caught another one.
Do you have a question? Which neighborhood association has a nominating committee? Fatima, could you speak to Hyde Park specifically about that?
I absolutely can. We don't have a specific nominating committee, but that is why we're working so hard to establish a community development committee, which will take on some of that responsibility. We will be doing calls, mailings. It'll be posted on our Facebook and website. We're going to do an all call for residents that are interested in joining on to that committee to help come up with the parameters and a charter and the whole 9. So stay tuned for information on that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Does anybody have any other questions about Prop NS? Sean and Zach were great and very detailed, and all of that information is on the website. This is, like they said, really rooted in community. Community wanted this, community drove this, community took it to the finish line, and now it's here and it's happening. So we're very proud of John and Zach and everybody for making Propinus happen. Not that we're not proud about everybody else that's on the call, but just want to put that out there.
And Lily, if I could add just one final point from me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Since you mentioned it's rooted in the community, it's also relatively new in terms of our implementation. So we will be tweaking this as we go along. As Zach indicated, we are learning as we do this. And so we will be trying to incorporate any kind of learnings to make the process more efficient and more effective. So bear with us, and we do try to get our postings on our site when there are upcoming stabilization advisory committee meetings, which are open through Zoom for anybody else who wants to watch and see the review process happen. So stand by and watch for the next committee meeting, which I believe is April 13th.
All right.
And if anybody has any further questions, there's a lot more good information on the website. If you have any questions after reviewing that, please reach out to us. There's a box where you can send an email to our team and we'll review that and get back to you as soon as possible. So thanks again.
Fantastic. Hey, does anybody have any questions for Sean and Zach? No? Whoa, maybe my dogs have a question, I don't know. But does anybody have any questions overall about anything that we talked about before we say goodbye?
Before we say goodbye, and if there aren't any questions, I'd just like to say thank you again for putting this together, Lily and the entire Vacancy Collaborative team. We appreciate the support. And again, we hope that you will continue to be engaged in the things that are going on in Hyde Park, because as we all know, what happens in this neighborhood affects other neighborhoods. So we are working diligently to build bridges and to break down all barriers so that the city in its totality will be a better place to live. So thank you all for joining. Lily, I think there are some other attendance prizes, so I'm sure everybody wants me to stop talking so they can hear about that. So thank you all, appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you for allowing us to spend the morning with the Hyde Park neighbors and other concerned stakeholders. This was fantastic, and I'm just so blown away and happy to see people care about Hyde Park in such a wonderful way. So also want to lift up that Tasha has put the Vacancy Collaborative Pledge in the chat. And so you are welcome to take the Vacancy Collaborative Pledge. And the collaborative is open to anybody. So we would love to have more folks at our meetings talking about things like Propinus and demolitions and LRA. So this is certainly not the end of this conversation. I also want to point out that I will send follow-up emails to everybody that participated today with a link to the recording and the links that were shared in the chat, as well as the contact information for each of our speakers to just continue the conversation. I'm also going to put in the chat an exit survey that I would definitely hope that you take it because it will help us figure out what worked, what didn't, and help us improve this experience for any future trainings that we might do. So please take a moment to take that exit survey. I would greatly appreciate it. And so without further ado, I am going to do our final two door prizes. So we're going to do we're going to use our favorite tool, which is the Wheel of Names. I can't tell you how much we enjoy doing the Wheel of Names. So I'm just going to look back through and make sure that I put everybody's name in the Wheel of Names. So we are going to do that. Same thing if your name is called by the wheel. Tasha's name is not in the wheel, everybody. And I think she signed in twice because maybe she thought, oh, that increases Lily's chance of putting my
Are you talking to me?
No. sorry. But yeah,
It's almost.
or Latasha's name isn't in the wheel. So, like I said, for those folks that's name, if your name gets called, please email me with your address so we can mail the door
Did you go
prize
get your stuff?
to you COVID safe. All right, here we go.
I love it.
Who won the vacant property guess? Maybe I missed that at the beginning.
We have to announce those winners. We did put them
Oh,
in the
sorry.
chat. But yeah, we can announce them. So the winners of the vacant property guess, Tara, can you remind me, is Adrian and
Russell.
Adrian and Russell. So they are the winners of the vacant property icebreaker guess. So congratulations to Adrian and Russell. Yes, we do want to acknowledge your win. And also congratulations to Dara and Leslie. So that's it. Thank you guys so much. This was fantastic. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to US Bank and everybody that helped. Maybe next time, Tasha. Yeah, maybe next time, Tasha will get picked in the wheel of names. But I will stick around afterwards in case anybody has any questions. But we will officially adjourn and have a great rest of your weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.